Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into something softer, slower, and, let's be honest, a little bit more tedious than the blood and battle stuff. Welcome to the Temple of the Moon, home of Thoth's priests, where spiritual life is less about divine visions and more about wondering if your bedmat can actually bruise you in your sleep. You've just woken up in a tiny stone cell before the first blush of dawn, and the moon is still hanging over the courtyard like it's in no rush to set. Which is fine for the moon, because unlike you, the moon doesn't have a high priest who thinks sunrise is late for morning prayer. You've been roused by a deep, hollow knock on the wooden door, the kind of sound that makes you wish you could melt into the bedding. Not that your bedding is much to melt into. It's a thin mat of woven reeds stuffed with what feels like gravel wrapped in papyrus. You roll over and instantly regret it, because the chill of the stone floor has crept up through the mat and settled into your bones. The air smells faintly of incense left burning from last night's moon vigil, but also of dust, old sandals, and that faint tang of oil from the lamps. Your cell is barely wide enough to stretch in, and your head is still heavy with sleep when the reality hits. Today, like every day, will be long. Your first task: pretend to be spiritually awake while your body is still desperately clinging to dreams. You sit up, pull on your sandals, the same pair you've worn for so long that the straps have moulded into shapes your feet don't even like, and shuffle toward the outer corridor. The temple is quiet, except for the sound of other priests doing the same half-asleep shuffle. No one talks this early. The only voices are the coos of the sacred pigeons that roost in the rafters, occasionally dropping divine blessings on the stone floor below. Outside, the dawn is just a pale smudge above the desert horizon. The sandstone walls of the temple glow faintly in the moonlight, carved with reliefs of Thoth in his ibis-headed glory, watching over you with that patient, eternal expression that somehow makes you feel both protected and judged. You head toward the washing basin in the outer court, because no prayer can be offered without ritual cleansing. The water is drawn fresh from the Nile each day, which sounds holy until you dip your hands into it and realize fresh just means cold enough to make you question your faith. You splash it over your face and arms, trying to ignore the way it drips down your linen tunic and chills you further. The high priest is already there, standing in his white robes, staff in hand, looking like he's been awake for hours, communing with divine wisdom. In reality, he's probably just good at hiding yawns. The gong sounds from the inner sanctuary, deep and resonant, and it's your cue to line up with the others. You glance up at the moon one last time before stepping into the main hall, because this will be the last peaceful moment before the day's rhythm swallows you whole. And so, before the sun even considers rising, you're already beginning the long, slow dance of devotion, duty, and dust, the life of Thoth's priest in the Temple of the Moon. If you thought the worst part of waking up in the Temple of the Moon was the hour, you clearly haven't taken your first real step of the day yet. The cold stone floor is the temple's unofficial morning greeting, a sharp, unfriendly reminder that comfort is for the afterlife, not the here and now. You slide your bare feet off the reed mat, and the chill bites like the Nile wind in winter. Every step sends a little shock up your legs, which would be fine if the gods had blessed you with thick wool socks. But here in Upper Egypt, socks are about as common as moon eclipses. That's when you reach for your sandals. Not a new pair, not even a good pair, just the pair. The same cracked leather things you've been wearing for years, shaped more by habit than by your actual foot. The straps are stiff from dust and sweat, the soles are worn into odd slopes, and there's a mystery pebble lodged in one that you've stopped trying to remove. You slip them on anyway, because the alternative is frostbitten toes, and more importantly, getting scolded by the sandal steward for disrespecting the temple's dignity. The corridor from your sleeping cell to the main courtyard is lined with limestone walls that seem to hold the night's cold like a grudge. Your breath fogs faintly in the air, a reminder that the sun isn't even thinking about making an appearance yet. Other priests are emerging from their cells, tugging on robes, adjusting headbands, rubbing at eyes swollen from sleep. There's a quiet camaraderie in the way everyone shuffles along without speaking, bound by the shared knowledge that the day's first prayer will happen whether your brain is ready or not. The floor beneath your sandals is smooth but not friendly, patches are polished from centuries of footsteps, others are rough, where time has chipped away the stone, and every so often a grain of sand crunches underfoot, somehow sharper than glass. The sandals, as always, start to remind you of their flaws. The left strap rubs against your ankle bone, creating a hot little sting that will become a proper blister by sunset. The right sole tilts inward, making your gait just lopsided enough to be irritating. But you keep walking, because complaining about sandals here is like complaining about the moon's light, pointless and guaranteed to make you sound ungrateful in front of the wrong people. You pass under an archway into the outer court, where the cold is less biting, but the wind carries in the first whispers of desert sand. Somewhere, a temple attendant is sweeping, an act that in this place is more about optimism than results. You line up with the others before the great bronze doors of the sanctuary. The high priest stands ahead, perfectly composed, his own sandals gleaming in the torchlight, proof that rank has its privileges. As the gong sounds and the doors swing open, the chill from the stone floor seems to retreat, replaced by the thick, warm air of incense and oil. Still, you know that cold is waiting for you out here, ready to sink back into your bones the moment you step away from the altar. The sandals will be there too, faithfully ill-fitting, carrying you through another day in Thoth's service, one uncomfortable step at a time. The first stop after lining up in the outer court isn't the altar, the scroll room, or even the high priest's side chamber. It's the washing basin, a stone trough carved so deep into the courtyard floor it feels more like a shallow tomb than a place to freshen up. The water inside is drawn daily from the Nile, which sounds poetic until you remember the Nile is also where fishermen dump their nets. Cattle wade in to drink, and half the village comes to wash their laundry. By the time it's carried in amphorae up the temple steps, it's less a shimmering gift from the gods and more a murky reminder of how far purity has to travel. Still, this is ritual cleansing, and ritual doesn't care about your opinions. You kneel on the cold flagstones beside the basin, your sandals slipping slightly on the wet patches left by the priests ahead of you. The water is shockingly cold, the kind that makes your skin tighten instantly and your breath catch in your throat. You're supposed to start with your hands, then your face, then your arms up to the elbows, all while muttering the prescribed invocations. But your muttering sounds more like teeth chattering as the droplets run down your linen sleeves, soaking the fabric in a way that will cling all morning. Beside you, another priest dips his hands and splashes his face with the grim determination of a man trying to stay awake, while a younger acolyte blinks back tears from the cold and pretends it's divine ecstasy. The high priest claims the water has been blessed overnight by the moonlight, a story everyone nods along to without pointing out that the basin sits under a roof beam that blocks half the sky. Whether blessed or not, the water smells faintly of wet stone and old reeds. Tiny motes drift in the current. Bits of leaf, grains of sand, maybe even a minuscule fish that somehow made it up from the river. You tell yourself these are signs of the Nile's life-giving spirit, not just things that got missed during the fill-up. Once your hands and face are dripping, you shake them out, which only sends cold rivulets down your wrists. There are no towels here. The sun is supposed to dry you as you walk to your duties, but at this hour the sun is still hiding behind the eastern hills. You stand, water pooling at your feet, and step aside for the next in line. The basin's lip is worn smooth from centuries of the same motions, hands dipping, water splashing, invocations murmured. Every priest who's ever served here has knelt in this exact spot, shivered under the exact same cold, and pretended it brought them closer to the divine. When the line is finished, the basin is left to sit, reflecting a sliver of moonlight that somehow survived the roof beams. The water will be changed tomorrow, and the day after, and every day until the temple's stones crumble. For now, you walk toward the sanctuary with damp sleeves, chilled fingers, and the knowledge that the gods, if they're watching, are probably amused at how easily mortals will suffer discomfort in the name of devotion. By the time you've shuffled into the sanctuary, your sleeves are still damp from the washing basin, your sandals have already rubbed a red line into your heel, and your stomach has started reminding you that it hasn't seen food since yesterday afternoon. But breakfast is still a distant dream, because the gods, according to temple tradition, need to be fed with hymns before you even think about feeding yourself. The chanting starts slow, a low hum from the front row of senior priests, their voices blending like the buzz of bees in a clay jar. You join in on the first verse, the syllables old enough to feel like they've been worn smooth from centuries of repetition. You don't even fully know what half of them mean. The language of the hymns is older than your grandmother's grandmother, and much of it is ceremonial filler anyway. Still, you mouth the words because that's what's expected, and because the high priest has the uncanny ability to notice if you skip a single line. The sanctuary itself is dim, lit by a few narrow shafts of moonlight from the high windows, the air thick with incense that blurs the edges of the statues. Thoth's figure dominates the far wall, ibis head angled in serene detachment, eyes carved so they seem to follow you as you sing. The polished floor echoes with every shuffle and shift, amplifying the rustle of linen robes and the occasional cough someone tries to hide inside a verse. The gong in the corner marks the change in hymn, a deep metallic sound that vibrates in your ribs. You've done this so many times you can predict each shift in tone before the high priest raises his hand. About halfway through, your jaw starts to ache. The rhythm is hypnotic, but not in a way that makes you forget your hunger. If anything, the constant opening and closing of your mouth just reminds you of how empty it is. Your mind drifts toward the thought of the morning bread, flat, dense, possibly yesterday's leftovers, and the small dish of dates you've heard rumours about from the kitchen boys. You quickly snap back when the high priest sweeps his arm, cueing the next invocation, one that rises in pitch until it brushes the edges of a whale. The sound fills the room, swelling against the stone until it feels like the walls themselves are humming along. The final chant is a long one, a single prayer stretched across multiple breaths, the kind that leaves you light-headed by the end. You take in air through your nose, feel the incense sting the back of your throat, and push the sound out until your voice blends so perfectly into the group it's hard to tell where you end and another priest begins. When the last note fades, there's a brief silence, heavy and absolute, as if even the air is waiting for permission to move again. Then the gong sounds once more, signalling the end. You bow toward Thoth's statue, back away in unison with the others, and only then allow yourself the thought that maybe, just maybe, it's finally time to put something in your stomach. The moment the final chant ends, there's a collective shift in the room. Not a break in devotion exactly, but a quiet, unspoken agreement that the gods have been tended to, and now it's our turn. You file out of the sanctuary with the others, passing under the tall bronze doors into the courtyard where the early light is beginning to wash over the stone. The air is still cool, but the scent of baking bread drifts from the small temple kitchen, and suddenly your focus narrows to that alone. The kitchen is not a grand hall of feasts. It's a cramped, smoky chamber tucked between two walls, where a clay oven squats in the corner and a pair of kitchen attendants move with the weary efficiency of men who know no one will thank them for their work. The bread, when it comes, is not the golden, fluffy kind you might imagine from temple offerings. This is priest bread, flat, round, and baked so long it could double as a defensive weapon. It's made from coarse barley flour ground with stone, which means every bite carries the subtle crunch of stray grit. You take a piece from the basket, still warm from the oven, but already hard enough that you have to flex your jaw before committing to a bite. The crust resists at first, then gives way with a crack that echoes faintly in the small room. Inside, it's dense, heavy, and just dry enough to make you wish for a drink, which you'll get, eventually, but only after the bread is gone. Around you, other priests eat in near silence, breaking bread with the careful attention of men who have chipped a tooth before and learned from it. Occasionally, someone will dip a piece in a small bowl of oil, more to soften the texture than to add flavour. The oil is sharp and earthy, and while it helps, it also soaks into your fingers, leaving them slick for the rest of the meal. There are no plates, just shared baskets and bowls, each passed down the line until they're empty. On good days, there might be a few dates or figs to sweeten the mouth after all that dryness. Today there are 3 figs for 12 priests. You don't bother trying, the senior clerics get first choice, and you've learned to avoid the awkward reach. You eat slowly, partly because chewing takes time, partly because you want to stretch out the moment before the day's work starts. The bread fills your stomach in the way a stone might fill a jar, heavy, solid, unmoving, and yet you know you'll be hungry again by midday. That's temple food for you, designed to sustain, not delight. When the last crumbs are brushed from the reed mats and the baskets are empty, the attendants collect them with the same resigned air they had when handing them out. You wipe your fingers on your robe, stand, and follow the others back toward the courtyard. The morning sun is just clearing the horizon now, gilding the temple's walls in pale gold. It's beautiful, but you can't linger. The gods may have been greeted and your stomach may be temporarily pacified, but the day is only just beginning. And there's a lot of work between now and the next piece of bread. Breakfast barely has time to settle before you're handed the next sacred duty, incense lighting. It sounds simple enough. Walk into the sanctuary, burn some fragrant resin, please the gods. But in the Temple of the Moon, nothing is ever as simple as it sounds. The incense is kept in a small stone jar carved with the image of an ibis in flight, sealed with a wax lid that's been pried off and resealed so many times it looks like a potter's experiment gone wrong. The resin inside is dark, sticky, and clumped together like a handful of river mud left out in the sun. They say it's frankincense and myrrh brought from faraway lands, but judging by the smell, there's a generous portion of whatever we could trade for at the market mixed in. You take a pinch, careful not to get too much of the sticky stuff under your fingernails. It takes hours to wash off, and place it in the small bronze burner. The burner itself sits on 3 delicate legs shaped like ibis talons, and the bowl is blackened from years of smoke. You lean down to light it, the spark from the flint catching quickly on the little twist of palm fibre you've tucked beneath the resin. The smoke starts almost immediately, curling upward in pale, slow spirals that look gentle but hit your throat with the force of a sandstorm. You try to breathe through your nose, but it doesn't help. The scent is sharp and resinous, sweet at first, then bitter enough to sting your eyes. The sanctuary fills with the smoke quickly, clinging to the carved walls and swirling around the high statue of Thoth like a living thing. It's meant to purify the space, to carry prayers heavenward, to create an atmosphere of divine presence. And maybe it does, but it also makes your eyes water so badly you're blinking between every step, trying to keep from tripping on the uneven floor. Other priests are lighting their own burners around the room, and soon the air is thick enough that the high priest's voice echoes in a kind of muffled haze. He speaks about the sacred scent being pleasing to the moon god, how it cleanses the soul as it cleanses the temple. You nod along, trying not to cough, because coughing would break the solemn mood, and also because you once did it mid-ceremony and got a glare that could strip paint. The smoke settles into your linen robe, into your hair, into the very fabric of the day. Long after the burner is empty, you'll still smell it in your sleeves. The elders claim that's part of the blessing, to carry the sacred scent with you as you work. But it feels more like carrying a portable cloud of, I've been standing in front of a burning tree for an hour. When the final curls of smoke drift upward and vanish into the high shadows of the sanctuary, you bow to the altar, your throat still tingling. The gods are satisfied, the space is purified, and your lungs have had their morning workout. And now, with the air still hazy around you, it's time to move on to the next duty, which, lucky you, involves dusting statues that are twice your height. The incense haze hasn't even cleared before the next task is thrust into your hands, quite literally, as an attendant presses a long-handled brush toward you without ceremony. The bristles are stiff and uneven, bound with twine to a polished wooden pole that's seen more repairs than a temple wall after flood season. Your mission? Dust the statues. Not the little shelf-sized ones, mind you, but the towering, many-cubit-high effigies of gods, pharaohs, and long-dead high priests who all stare down at you like they're judging your technique. The air in the sanctuary is still thick, the smoky smell clinging to the statues' carved stone robes, turning the job into a mixture of cleaning and trying not to sneeze directly in the face of a deity. You start at the base of the nearest statue, Thoth himself, ibis-headed and eternally serene, sweeping away the fine layer of sand that somehow finds its way inside despite the temple's heavy doors. Sand in Egypt is like gossip. No matter how hard you try to keep it out, it always manages to appear where you least expect it. The brush makes a soft, rasping sound against the limestone, stirring up motes of dust that catch in the beams of morning light slanting through the high windows. Above you, the carved ibis head tilts just enough to make you feel like the god is watching your every move, silently noting each spot you miss. The higher you go, the trickier it gets. You use the pole to reach the folds of the stone robe, the creases between carved feathers, and the awkward space under the outstretched hand that holds a symbolic scroll. Your arms start to ache, the weight of the pole reminding you that this job is less about reverence and more about endurance. From somewhere behind you, another priest is humming one of the morning hymns, which would be soothing if it didn't sound suspiciously like he was mocking your slow pace. You grit your teeth and keep brushing, pretending not to hear. Then comes the balancing act, moving the brush from one statue to the next, without knocking over any of the smaller altars in between. These altars are lined with offerings, bowls of grain, little clay figurines, even a carved loaf of bread that's been sitting there so long it's more stone than wheat. You step carefully, the cold floor making your sandals squeak, and begin on the next figure, a past high priest immortalized in a pose of stern authority. His stone eyes are narrow, his mouth set in the kind of frown that says, "You missed a spot, boy." By the time you've finished the last statue, your shoulders are sore, your wrists are stiff, and your robe is dusted with the same fine grit you've just spent an hour removing. The sanctuary looks almost the same as when you started. The difference is subtle, like the change in a chant after the 10th repetition. But it's enough. You replace the brush in the storage alcove, bow toward the altar, and step back into the courtyard. Outside, the sun is higher now, and you catch yourself squinting at the light, grateful for the fresh air, even if it's carrying in more sand you'll be sweeping up tomorrow. No matter how many walls, doors, and courtyards the Temple of the Moon has, it might as well be a sieve when it comes to sand. You've barely put away the dusting brush before someone hands you a broom, long reed bristles bound so tightly they fan out in an awkward, lopsided cone, and points you toward the outer court. The wind from the desert is steady today, not a howling storm, but enough to scatter fine grains through every open archway. You start at the far side of the courtyard, the polished limestone cool under your sandals, and push the broom in slow arcs, trying to gather the sand into neat little piles. It's not hard work, but it is the kind of work that convinces you the gods have a sense of humour. Every stroke clears a narrow strip, and every breeze sends a fresh scattering back over your progress. The courtyard is ringed by massive columns carved with hieroglyphs of lunar cycles, each base crusted with sand that resists being coaxed out. You work your way around, sweeping carefully between the feet of visiting worshippers who have wandered in early to light their own sticks of incense. A small child drops half a handful of dates right where you've just swept, and you force a polite smile while mentally adding "cleaning up after strangers" to your unspoken job description. The sound of your broom swishing over stone blends with the low murmur of priests in the colonnade, reciting the first readings of the day. Somewhere above, pigeons flutter between the beams, occasionally knocking down tiny showers of dust to add to your workload. You try to keep your mind on the rhythm, push, gather, collect, but the wind keeps interrupting, sneaking little drifts into corners you haven't reached yet. It's like sweeping the shoreline while the tide is coming in. By the time you finish one side of the courtyard, the other side already has a thin layer again, sparkling in the sunlight like the desert's idea of a joke. You sigh, adjust your grip on the broom, and go back to where you started, because temple tradition demands the floor be clean for the midday rites, even if clean is just an illusion lasting 5 minutes. One of the older priests passes you, pats your shoulder, and says something about how sweeping is a meditative act, a way to keep the spirit clear. You nod respectfully, though inwardly you suspect it's just a convenient way to make endless manual labour sound noble. Finally, you herd the last pile of sand toward the doorway, tipping it out into the street where the wind can carry it back to the desert, or more likely, back inside before nightfall. You stand for a moment, leaning on the broom, feeling the muscles in your forearms hum from the repetitive motion. The courtyard gleams in the sun, at least for now, and you take in the sight with a kind of weary satisfaction. The gods will have their clean floor, the worshippers will have their tidy space, and you'll have about 10 minutes before the breeze undoes all of it. But that's temple life. Nothing stays still, not even the dust. After sweeping sand out of the courtyard, and knowing full well it will be back by evening, you're sent into one of the quieter chambers of the temple, The air here is cooler, still carrying a faint trace of last night's incense, and lit only by thin shafts of sunlight slipping through high slits in the wall. Against the far side of the room sits a long wooden table lined with carefully arranged writing tools, reed pens, bronze styluses, ink palettes carved from alabaster, and scroll cases made of dark, oiled wood. These are the sacred scribe's tools, used for copying hymns, transcribing dreams, and recording the high priest's pronouncements. Or at least, that's what the temple wants everyone to think. In truth, most of them are ceremonial relics that haven't touched actual papyrus in years. Your job? Polish them. Every single one. It's not a task for speed, it's a task for precision, because these are the tools that get paraded in festivals and laid out in front of dignitaries, the visual proof that Thoth's temple is a place of wisdom. You start with the reed pens, their tips hardened with age and darkened with old ink stains. A small linen cloth, slightly damp with oil, is all you have to work with. You rub each reed until it gleams a pale gold in the sunlight, the fibres catching slightly against your cloth. You know they'll never write cleanly again, but that's not the point. The point is that they look like they could. Next are the bronze styluses, their shafts cool and smooth in your hands. They're heavy for their size, the metal engraved with tiny hieroglyphs of the moon and ibis, so fine you have to tilt them toward the light to see. You run the cloth along each groove, removing the invisible layer of dust that has settled since the last cleaning. Behind you, another priest coughs softly, the sound echoing in the stone chamber. But otherwise, the room is silent. It's the kind of silence that magnifies every small sound. The scrape of metal against cloth, the faint rustle of linen sleeves, the soft thud when you set each piece back in its place. The alabaster palettes are trickier. Their shallow wells are stained with ancient ink, black, red, and the faint traces of yellow that no amount of polishing will erase. You swirl the cloth in each groove anyway, partly for form, partly because you like the way the stone feels under your fingertips, cool, slightly grainy, like touching a piece of frozen moonlight. The scroll cases are the final task, their oiled wood rich with scent, the surface catching the light in a way that almost makes you forget how tedious this is. You wipe them carefully, tracing the carved lines of lunar phases around the circumference, feeling the tiny dips where centuries of hands have worn the pattern smooth. When you're done, the tools gleam in the sunlight, arranged in perfect symmetry. They still won't be used for anything practical, but they'll look magnificent on display, which in the temple is often the same thing as serving the gods. You stand for a moment, admiring the neat row, and then step back as the high priest's aide comes in to inspect the work. He nods once, says nothing, and leaves, which in temple language means you did well enough not to repeat the job. You set the cloth aside, flex your fingers, and head toward the next task, knowing that the next duty will be far less delicate and far more absurd, turning petty complaints into lofty prayers. If you thought temple life was all chanting and incense, here's the part where the job feels suspiciously like customer service. After polishing the sacred tools, you're called into the small reception chamber, a shaded room just inside the temple's outer wall where townspeople can bring their petitions. These are the requests meant to be offered before Thoth, written in formal, flowery language, and placed on the altar during the evening rites. In theory, they're matters of divine importance. In practice, they're less grand. The first merchant today is a linen seller who insists his neighbour has been stealing his best dyed cloth at night. He wants Thoth's wisdom to shine upon this dishonourable man until he withers with shame, which, after some gentle editing, you render as, "May the moon god's light guide the heart of my neighbour back to the path of honesty." You can almost hear the gods rolling their eyes. Next in line is a fishmonger with a complaint about the weather. Apparently the Nile's current has been too swift, making his morning catches smaller. He believes the moon's influence on the tides is to blame and wants you to ask Thoth to slow the river a little. You manage to dress it up into something suitably reverent about calming the restless waters and blessing the humble nets of your servant. Whether or not Thoth actually gets involved in river speed management is another question. The room smells faintly of papyrus, dust, and whatever the last petitioner had for breakfast. A small reed mat separates you from the locals, and the scribe's desk before you is littered with scraps of parchment, half-filled ink jars, and a growing pile of reed pen shavings. You dip your pen, scratch out another request, this time from a potter asking that his kiln stop cracking pots, and wonder if anyone has ever brought a petition that didn't involve personal gain. Even the selfless ones tend to circle back. One farmer asks for a blessing on his sick ox, so it may live to help plough the temple's own grain field. You suspect the ox's health matters slightly less to him than the harvest yield. Sometimes, though, there's a request that catches you off guard. Today, it's an old woman, barefoot, carrying a small bundle wrapped in linen. She sets it down carefully. It's a loaf of bread, likely her best, and asks only that Thoth grant her granddaughter a clear mind for learning. You write that one exactly as she says it, without embellishment. Not because you think the gods listen more to pure requests, but because you want to keep her words intact. By midday, your fingers are cramped from writing, your neck is stiff, and the pile of petitions has grown into a small hill. Later, these will be recited aloud in the sanctuary, transformed from the messy complaints of daily life into lofty-sounding prayers worthy of marble walls and sacred ears. You gather them into a neat stack, tie them with a cord, and set them aside for the evening. Outside, the sun is high, and the next task is waiting. One far less dignified, but equally unavoidable, hauling the day's offerings, no matter how fragrant or foul, up to the altar. The petitions may be written and tied in neat bundles, but the offerings, they are far less orderly and far more aromatic. The temple's side courtyard is already crowded when you arrive. Clay baskets of bread stacked on reed mats, bowls of figs and dates buzzing with flies, and, in the far corner, a few clay jars containing fish from the Nile that have been sitting just long enough for the sun to start working its disagreeable magic. A pair of young acolytes are trying to sort it all into categories, grain here, fruit there, mystery items in a separate pile, but their system is more hopeful than accurate. You grab the first basket within reach, 2 loaves of barley bread, one slightly charred, the other looking suspiciously nibbled at the edge. The offerings have to be brought into the sanctuary before the midday prayers, placed carefully at the foot of the moon altar so the gods can be properly presented with them, which means lifting, balancing, and sometimes holding your breath. The second load you take is a clay bowl of dates, safe enough, except they're sticky, and by the time you've crossed the courtyard, your fingers feel like they've been dipped in resin. The third load is worse, a jar of fish sealed with a thin cap of woven reeds. Even with the lid in place, the smell escapes in small, accusing bursts every time you shift it in your arms. By the time you set it down on the altar steps, your stomach is doing small protests. Other priests are carrying their own burdens, a pair of melon-like gourds, a bundle of onions so pungent they seem to perfume the entire hallway, and a collection of small clay figurines meant as symbolic offerings. One of the older attendants grumbles about the heat, the weight, and the lack of any help from the nobler ranks, meaning the high priest and his immediate circle, who will later take credit for all this work without having lifted so much as a fig. You keep your thoughts to yourself, partly out of habit, partly because you're busy adjusting your grip on a tray of flat cakes that smell faintly of honey but are hard enough to crack stone. Inside the sanctuary, the offerings are laid out in a precise order, breads and grains in the centre, fruits to the left, oils and incense to the right, meat and fish in the outermost row. The arrangement is supposed to symbolize balance, harmony, and abundance. From your perspective, it mostly symbolizes how quickly food can wilt under temple heat. By the time the prayers begin, some of the figs will already be shriveling, and the fish will be giving off a scent that competes with the incense. Still, you kneel after placing each item, murmuring the proper words of presentation. When the last basket is set down and the altar steps are swept clean of stray crumbs and sand, you straighten up and rub the ache from your shoulders. The gods now have their midday feast assembled, and you have the faint smell of dried fish clinging to your robes. The next task, tending to someone in the temple who doesn't care for offerings, prayers, or schedules, the sacred cat, who has once again claimed the sunniest spot in the courtyard and isn't planning to move for anyone. There are many hierarchies within the Temple of the Moon. The high priest at the top, senior clerics beneath him, scribes, attendants, acolytes, and then, above all of them in actual influence, there's the sacred cat. Officially, she's a living symbol of divine grace, chosen for her sleek black coat and the small white crescent on her forehead that supposedly marks her as blessed by the moon god himself. Unofficially, she's the true ruler of the temple, and everyone knows it. She appears when she wants, disappears when she wants, and occupies whatever space suits her at the moment. Today, it's the sun-warmed stone in the centre of the outer courtyard, right where you need to walk to reach the storage chamber. She doesn't move when you approach. She doesn't even blink. Her green eyes are half closed in that slow, deliberate way that says, "You may pass, but only if I decide you're worth it." You take a cautious step closer, hoping she'll take the hint and shift a little to the side. She yawns instead, stretching out in a way that somehow makes her take up even more space. You remind yourself she's sacred, which means you can't nudge her along with your sandal or make loud noises to scare her away. Instead, you stand there in the awkward standoff that every temple worker knows, one where the cat will win regardless of the outcome. Finally, you crouch and offer the tiny piece of dried fish you saved from the offerings earlier. Her nose twitches. She pretends to consider whether she's interested. After a long, agonizing pause, she steps forward, takes the fish from your hand, and eats it in 3 neat bites. Payment received. She now allows you to pass, though not without brushing against your robe and leaving a small constellation of hairs clinging to the linen. This is her way of marking you, not in ownership exactly, but as a reminder to everyone else that you've been in her presence. The sacred cat's privileges don't end with blocking walkways. She strolls through the sanctuary during prayer without consequence, curls up on ceremonial cushions meant for visiting dignitaries, and occasionally knocks small clay figurines off low tables just to see them roll. When the high priest notices, he smiles indulgently, interpreting her every movement as an omen. If she sits facing the moon, it's a blessing. If she faces away, it's a warning. If she's simply grooming herself in the sun, it's apparently a sign of divine contentment. No one dares to suggest it might just be a sign of being a cat. Once she's done gracing the courtyard with her presence, she pads off toward the storage chambers, tail high, likely to nap among the grain sacks until evening. You step aside to let her pass, because of course you do, and watch her vanish into the shadowed hallway. The space feels subtly different without her, as if some invisible part of the temple's rhythm has gone with her. You know she'll be back, probably in the middle of some important ceremony, and when she returns, everyone will pause as if the moon itself has entered the room. Because here, in the Temple of the Moon, even the gods seem content to let the cat have her way. After the sacred cat has disappeared into whatever sunbeam or grain sack she's chosen for her midday throne, your next assignment takes you to one of the most restricted chambers in the temple, the Scroll Vault. It's a narrow, cool room tucked deep within the inner walls, lit by a single oil lamp and heavy with the smell of dried papyrus and cedar. The air feels still here, as if sound itself hesitates to disturb the silence. The scrolls are arranged in neat bundles along stone shelves, each tied with cord and marked with small clay seals bearing the moon god's symbol. They hold everything from temple accounts to astronomical records, hymns older than the city itself, and commentaries on the nature of divine order that would take a lifetime to understand. Not that you'll ever get the chance. Your job isn't to read them, it's to guard them, which sounds dignified until you realize guarding mostly means sitting on a low stool for hours while nothing happens. The temple logic is that these scrolls contain wisdom so potent, so sacred, that only the high priest and a select few scribes are permitted to unroll them. To everyone else, they're just bundles of forbidden knowledge, tempting, dangerous, and completely off-limits. You could be in here a lifetime and still never know whether a scroll contains a hymn to the moon, or an inventory of how many onions the temple bought last year. The room is cool, but the stool is uncomfortable, and after a while, your knees start to ache. You shift your weight, listening to the faint sounds from beyond the thick stone door, the occasional echo of footsteps in the hallway, the muted clang of a gong from the outer court. Sometimes another priest will come in, unlock a shelf with a bronze key, and remove a single scroll to carry to the scriptorium. You're not allowed to ask what's in it. You're not even supposed to glance too closely at the seal. You just nod, watch them leave, and go back to staring at the same section of wall. The most excitement you've had in here was the time a small gecko wandered in from the courtyard and perched on a scroll shelf, staring at you like it knew a secret. You tried to shoo it out without making a sound, but it just flicked its tail and settled in for the afternoon. Eventually, the sacred cat showed up, and the matter was resolved in a way that didn't require your involvement, though the high priest later interpreted the incident as an omen of renewal, which you decided not to question. Hours pass like this. Slow, deliberate, almost meditative. If your idea of meditation involves stiff joints and the faint anxiety of being surrounded by priceless objects you mustn't touch. When your shift finally ends, another guard takes your place, settling onto the stool with the same resigned posture you had when you arrived. You stretch your legs, shake the pins and needles from your feet, and step back into the brighter hallways of the temple. Your next stop is a change of pace, the scriptorium, where you'll spend the afternoon copying the same line of sacred text over and over until your fingers cramp. The scriptorium is warmer than the vault, and not in a welcoming way. The sun filters through high slits in the wall, heating the air just enough to make the smell of ink and parchment sharper. Long wooden tables run the length of the room, each lined with stools and stacked with sheets of fresh papyrus. Bronze and clay ink pots are set out in neat rows, the black ink thick enough to cling to the reed pens even when you're only half paying attention. On one wall, a small bronze gong hangs silently. The only sound it will make all afternoon is to signal when you may finally stop writing. You find your seat among the other scribes, slide your reed pen from its slot, and unroll the scroll that's been assigned to you. It contains a single proverb. The wisdom of Thoth is a river without end, and the wise man drinks from it daily. A fine sentiment the first time you read it. Less fine the 50th. Your job is to copy it exactly in the most precise hand you can manage across sheet after sheet of papyrus. The copies will be stored, presented to visiting dignitaries, or used in future ceremonies, or more likely, will sit untouched in some chest until they become part of the temple's ancient archives. The first few repetitions are steady enough. You trace each hieroglyph with deliberate care, the pen scratching lightly over the fibres. The characters come easily to your hand. The ibis for Thoth, the flowing lines for water, the open hands for offering. After the 10th sheet, your wrist begins to ache and the papyrus fibres catch at the pen tip more often, making the ink blot in tiny, infuriating spots. You adjust your grip, shift your weight on the hard stool, and keep going. Around you, other scribes are locked in the same quiet rhythm, heads bent, hands moving in perfect unison like the gears of some ancient machine. Your mind wanders, as it always does, trying to remember if you closed your cell door this morning, wondering what the sacred cat is doing now, considering whether anyone has ever read all these proverbs or if they're simply meant to exist. You glance up at the walls, the shelves of neatly rolled scrolls, the small alcove where a senior scribe watches to make sure no one drifts too far from the task. He has the look of a man who can spot a sloppy glyph from across the room. The hours stretch, measured only by the slow movement of the sunbeam across your table and the gradual numbness in your lower back. Finally, the gong sounds, a single clear note that feels like a lifeline. You set down your pen, flex your cramped fingers, and pass your stack of completed sheets to the collecting table. The proverb still rings in your head, not as a source of wisdom, but as a stubborn echo that won't leave. As you leave the scriptorium, blinking into the cooler hallway, you can already hear the faint rumble of voices from the council chamber. Your next assignment is waiting there, sitting quietly, while the priests debate something as trivial as the moon's shade of silver, as if the empire depends on it. The council chamber smells faintly of cedar oil and the faintly metallic tang of the bronze braziers burning in each corner. The air is heavy enough that it feels like you're walking into a conversation that started decades ago and has never truly ended. A half-circle of stone benches lines the room, with the high priest seated at the centre, draped in white linen so crisp it might have been woven from moonlight itself. Around him, senior priests lean in, gesturing toward a series of small painted panels laid out on the low table in the centre. Each one is a slightly different shade of silver, or, more accurately, a different shade of grey with poetic names like Night's First Breath, Fading Lantern, and Heron's Wing in Moonlight. You take your seat on the outer bench, in the section reserved for attendants whose main role is to be quiet and present in case someone needs a document fetched or an ink pot replaced. But here, being silent doesn't mean being idle. The high priest speaks slowly, his voice low and deliberate, about the importance of accurately portraying the moon in ceremonial paintings, while the others nod gravely, as if the fate of the temple truly hangs on whether the lunar disk leans more toward pearl or ash. One priest insists that the colour must be lighter this year because the last harvest was abundant and the gods should be honoured with brightness. Another counters that a deeper tone conveys mystery and wisdom, which is fitting for Thoth. A third suggests mixing the two pigments, a compromise that sparks murmurs of cautious approval until someone points out that blended tones can appear muddy under torchlight. That last point reignites the whole debate, with priests leaning forward, stabbing fingers toward the paint samples as if they were battle maps. You keep your expression carefully neutral, though inwardly you marvel that a group of men who can't agree on the colour of the moon are entrusted with interpreting divine will. Every so often, the high priest looks toward the outer benches, as if expecting some sign of insight from you or the other attendants. You nod when it seems appropriate, adjusting your posture to signal respectful attentiveness. The discussion drifts into tangents. Whether the lunar crescent should be positioned with its horns upward or sideways in temple murals, whether the background sky should contain stars or be left blank, and whether the sacred cat should be depicted alongside the moon in certain panels. The latter receives enthusiastic agreement from everyone, which only confirms her status as the temple's true sovereign. After what feels like an eternity, the high priest raises his hand and the room falls silent. He declares that the moon will be painted in harvest pearl, a tone somewhere between the second and fourth samples. The decision is met with solemn nods, as if he's just concluded a peace treaty. Scribes are summoned to record the verdict for the artisans, and the painted panels are carefully gathered up. As the council disperses, you stand, bow, and slip out into the corridor. Your next task lies not in debates or pigments, but in something far less philosophical, carrying water jars from the well to refill the washing basins before the evening rites. And unlike the moon, there's only one shade of water. The temple's well sits in the far corner of the outer courtyard, shaded by a cluster of date palms, whose fronds rustle faintly in the afternoon breeze. The air here is cooler, but the work is anything but. You arrive to find two large clay jars waiting beside the well, their sides painted with faint, flaking patterns of lotus flowers. They are empty now, which makes them deceptively easy to lift. The trouble starts once they're filled. Drawing water from the well is a rhythmic task. Lower the rope, hear the splash, pull it up hand over hand until the bucket crests the edge, then pour it into the jar. The water is cool and clear, the surface trembling slightly as it settles. You repeat the process until the jar is full, the level just high enough to slosh if you move too quickly. Then you crouch, grip the jar by its thick handles, and lift. The clay is rough against your palms, and the weight shifts with every step, forcing you to adjust your balance constantly. The path from the well to the washing basins winds through the courtyard, past the outer colonnade, and into a side passage where the basins are lined up against the wall. Worshippers and priests pass by, some stepping aside for you, others making you pause and shift the jar's weight while they take their time. By the time you reach the basins and tip the water in, your shoulders burn, your forearms ache, and the cool splash against the stone feels like the smallest of rewards. Then it's back to the well for the second jar. The sun has shifted lower, casting long shadows across the courtyard, but the air still carries the day's heat. You fall into the same rhythm: rope, bucket, pour, trying not to think about how much heavier this jar seems than the first. The truth is, water hauling is one of those temple chores that no one talks about with reverence. It's not mystical, It's not ceremonial, and it leaves you with nothing but sore muscles and damp hems, and yet, without it, the evening purification rites would grind to a halt. Once both jars have been delivered and the basins filled, you take a moment to lean against the cool stone wall, catching your breath. The sound of trickling water is oddly soothing, a reminder that even in the middle of stone and ritual, something as simple as fresh water still matters. You watch as an attendant comes in to wash his hands, the water rippling under his fingers, carrying away the dust of the day. Your respite is short-lived. A junior priest enters, reminding you that the lamps in the sanctuary must be trimmed and relit before the dusk prayers begin. And so you leave the basins behind, stepping back into the shifting light of the courtyard, ready to trade the weight of water jars for the scent of oil and the flicker of flames. The sanctuary feels different at dusk. The air is cooler, the echo of footsteps softer, and the long shadows stretch across the floor like dark rivers. Along the walls and pillars, bronze oil lamps hang from hooks or rest on small stone shelves, each one a shallow bowl with a single spout for the wick. By now, most of them are still glowing faintly, their wicks shrunken and frayed from the day's burning. Your task is to make them ready for the evening rites, which means trimming the wicks, refilling the oil, and making sure every flame will burn steady once night falls. You start at the nearest lamp, pinching the blackened wick between your fingers and carefully snapping off the charred end. The smell is faintly acrid, clinging to your fingertips even as you wipe them on your robe. You tilt the lamp slightly to see how much oil remains, never enough, and pour in more from the clay jug you carry. The oil is cool and thick, flowing in a slow stream that catches the light. When the level is right, you set the wick back in place and light it from the flame of a nearby lamp. The new fire flares briefly, then settles into a steady glow. You move from lamp to lamp, repeating the process. Pinch, pour, light. The rhythm becomes almost hypnotic. The faint hiss when a fresh wick catches, the soft glug of oil, the gentle sway of shadows on the walls. It all blends into a quiet ritual that feels both mundane and sacred. Some lamps are higher up, requiring you to stretch on your toes or use the small wooden stool kept in the corner. Others are tucked into alcoves where you have to lean awkwardly to reach them, careful not to spill a drop of oil on the polished stone floor. In the centre of the sanctuary stands the great moon altar, flanked by two massive bronze lamps that burn brighter than the rest. These take more time. The wicks are thick and heavy, the bowls deep enough that your hand disappears into the warm glow as you refill them. When the flames rise, they cast a golden halo on the altar's silver inlays, making the carved crescent seem to shimmer in the half-light. By the time you finish, the sanctuary is alive with steady flames. The shadows now fall where they're meant to, long and deliberate, framing the altar rather than swallowing it. You step back, oil jug empty, and watch as the light transforms the space into something otherworldly. The faint smell of burning oil mixes with the sweet tang of incense drifting in from the outer halls. You know the worshippers will soon file in for the dusk prayers, taking the light for granted, never thinking about the hours spent keeping it even. But that's the way of the temple. The smallest tasks vanish into the grand picture, and as you leave the sanctuary, you're already being called to your next duty, helping set up the incense burners that will fill the night with smoke and silence. The incense store is tucked away in a narrow chamber behind the sanctuary, its door sealed with a simple wooden bar. Inside, the air is thick with fragrance, sharp resin, sweet wood, a hint of something floral that clings to your robe the moment you step inside. Clay jars line the shelves, each marked with a small painted symbol: myrrh, frankincense, cedar, sandalwood, and blends so secret their recipes are known only to the high priest and the temple's chief perfumer. It's easy to forget that these substances are worth more than most villagers will see in their lifetimes. One careless spill here could equal the value of a season's harvest. Your task is to prepare enough incense to keep the sanctuary filled with a steady veil of smoke throughout the night. You start by selecting the base, a mix of powdered myrrh and crushed sandalwood, measured into a shallow bronze bowl. The scent rises instantly, warm and grounding, as you stir it with a carved wooden spoon. Next comes the resin, chipped from a lump of imported frankincense, its pale grains catching the lamplight like tiny crystals. You add them one by one, the sound of them hitting the bowl like small stones in water. A pinch of cedar shavings follows, their dry, smoky scent curling upward as if eager to escape. The final ingredient is a small twist of the secret blend, a deep reddish powder stored in a sealed jar, opened only for rites that span the moon's rise to its setting. You add it sparingly, watching the colour of the mix deepen, as if the night itself has been folded into the bowl. Once the blend is ready, you carry it to the outer sanctuary, where the bronze incense burners sit on tall stands. Each burner is shaped like a lotus in bloom, its petals open to cradle the glowing charcoal within. You spoon the incense onto the coals, and the transformation is immediate. A soft hiss, then tendrils of pale smoke rising and curling into the air. The scent shifts as it burns, becoming fuller, rounder, almost intoxicating. You move from burner to burner, feeding each one until the sanctuary is wrapped in a haze that catches the lamplight and turns it golden. The smoke clings to your hair and skin, and you know it will follow you for the rest of the night, sinking into your robe until it becomes part of its fabric. Worshippers will soon breathe this in as they pray, the scent mingling with their whispered petitions, carrying them, at least in their minds, closer to the gods. When the last burner is filled, you step back and watch the smoke drift upward, curling along the carved pillars before slipping into the high vaults. The sanctuary feels smaller now, more enclosed, as if the outside world has been shut away. Somewhere beyond the haze, the gong will sound for the dusk prayers, and you'll take your place among the attendants, invisible in the half-light, breathing the same air as the gods. And after that, there's no rest. The night watch begins, and you'll be pacing the moonlit corridors until the stars fade. The temple after dusk is another world entirely. By day it hums with movement, footsteps, voices, the shuffle of sandals against stone. At night, the corridors fall into a hush so deep you can hear the faint crackle of the oil lamps and the distant drip of water in the cisterns. The moonlight pours through the high windows in pale silver beams, striping the floors and pillars. Your task for the night watch is simple in description, endless in practice. Walk the corridors, check the doors, keep the silence intact. You start at the sanctuary, where the incense still burns in low curls, drifting lazily toward the ceiling. The lamps glow steady, their flames bowing slightly in the draught from the open clear-story windows. You step softly past the altar, noting the offerings laid out earlier, now cold, the bread hardened, the fruits beginning to sink into themselves. The sacred cat is nowhere to be seen, but you know she's somewhere in the temple's shadowed corners, moving unseen like a spirit of her own. The first circuit of the outer halls is always the easiest. The air is still fresh from the evening cool, and the novelty of the silence feels almost like reverence. You pass the scroll vault, its heavy door sealed with the bronze lock, and the scriptorium, its benches empty, the inkpots covered to keep the dust out. The shadows stretch long along the walls, shifting only when you pass a lamp and your own silhouette folds over them. By the second circuit, the monotony sets in. Your footsteps start to sound louder, each soft thud against the stone bouncing back from the walls. You pause now and then to listen, not for anything specific, but for the absence of anything that shouldn't be here. On rare nights, there's a stray rustle that turns out to be nothing more than the wind slipping through a half-closed shutter. Once, months ago, it was a rat in the grain storage. That night, you and another attendant spent the better part of an hour chasing it out, only for the sacred cat to stroll in later, clearly offended you'd taken her work. Halfway through the night, you stop in the central courtyard, where the moon is high enough to flood the open space with pale light. You lean against a column, letting your eyes rest on the reflection of the moon in the shallow basin at the courtyard's centre. It trembles slightly, disturbed by the faintest breeze, yet it feels as steady as stone. It's moments like these, between duties, between hours, when the temple feels most alive, even in stillness. By the final circuit, your legs are heavy, and the first thin threads of dawn are starting to pull at the edges of the night sky. You return to the sanctuary one last time, checking the lamps, which burn lower now, their oil nearly gone. The incense is only embers, a faint scent lingering in the air. You know that soon the morning crew will arrive, and the whole cycle will begin again. You set down your patrol staff, bow once toward the altar, and step outside just as the first bird calls cut through the fading stars. The first light of dawn is thin, almost hesitant, spilling over the temple walls in pale gold streaks. The city beyond is still quiet. No marketplace shouts, no clatter of donkey carts, only the occasional soft bleating of a goat somewhere in the distance. Within the temple, the air is cool enough that your breath feels fresher, and the faint dampness from the night lingers in the stone. This is when the morning purification begins, long before most of the priests have even left their cells. The purification starts with water. You step into the washing hall where the basins you filled the day before now wait, the surface of the water perfectly still. Your first act is to rinse your hands and face 3 times, letting the coolness chase away the heaviness from your limbs. Then comes the mouth rinse. A small cup of water, swirled and spat into a separate basin so that no unclean breath lingers for the rites ahead. The high priest insists that the gods notice such things, even if mortals do not. After washing, you change into fresh linen. The garments are stored in a cedar-lined chest to keep away moths, each piece folded with care and smelling faintly of the wood. Pulling the robe over your head, you feel the soft brush of the fabric against your skin. Lighter than your day robe, uncreased, meant for the morning's first prayers. You bind it with a simple sash, the knot resting just above your hip. The old robe, faint with incense smoke and the dust of night patrols, is set aside for cleaning. Next comes the cleansing of the sanctuary itself. You enter quietly, carrying a small bronze dish filled with water mixed with natron. The mixture has a sharp, mineral scent, and as you sprinkle it across the floor and along the base of the altar, you imagine it seeping into the stone, dissolving whatever unseen impurities may have clung there overnight. Other attendants follow behind with reed brushes, sweeping away any stray dust or petals from the offerings. The altar's silver inlays catch the first glints of sunlight, and for a moment the whole space feels suspended, not night, not fully day. Once the sanctuary is cleansed, you tend to the offerings. The old bread and fruit from the previous day are removed and carried to the outer courtyard, where they will be taken to feed the poor or disposed of in the temple's refuse pits. Fresh loaves, bowls of figs, and jars of milk are set in their place, arranged with the same precision as always. Every curve of the fruit, every fold of the bread, must face the altar as if the gods will personally inspect the arrangement. The last step is lighting the morning incense. The blend is lighter than the night's, more myrrh, less of the heavy secret powder, so that it drifts upward without overwhelming the senses. As the smoke begins to rise, curling toward the high vaults, the first rays of full sunlight slip through the clerestory windows, catching the haze in golden beams. By the time the city outside begins to stir, the temple is already awake, purified, and ready. The rest of the priests will arrive soon, stepping into a space that feels timeless, unaware of the quiet work that made it so. The moment the sun clears the horizon, the gong in the sanctuary sounds. A single deep note that vibrates through the stone like a heartbeat. It is the signal for the sunrise hymn, the first formal prayer of the day, and one of the few times every priest in the temple stands together in the same place. You join the slow-moving stream of white-robed figures filing into the sanctuary, each carrying a small strip of linen to cover the mouth while singing, a gesture meant to keep the breath pure for the gods. The sanctuary is already glowing with light, the silver inlays on the altar catching fire in the sun's first full blaze. Incense from the morning purification still drifts upward, curling between the columns in slow spirals. The high priest takes his place before the altar, lifting a bronze sistrum, a kind of sacred rattle, and shaking it once, the metallic chime cutting through the silence. It is not music exactly, but it is the sound that calls the hymn into being. The first notes rise low, a murmur of voices blending together like the hum of bees in a sunlit field. The hymn's words are ancient, so old that some of their meanings are debated even among scholars of the temple. But here, meaning matters less than rhythm. The phrases rise and fall in a slow arc, repeating in cycles that seem to loop back on themselves like the path of the moon. You can feel the vibrations in your chest as much as hear them in your ears. As the hymn builds, the volume swells, the voices lifting higher until they seem to press against the very ceiling. The sound is not beautiful in the way a single trained singer might be. It is beautiful in its unity, the merging of dozens of voices into a single, unbroken current. The air grows thick with incense and heat, and you feel as if the sound itself is turning into something tangible, smoke woven into song. Halfway through, your throat begins to tighten. It's always this way. The hymn is long, and the air in the sanctuary is heavy, but there's no stopping, no dropping out. You push through the dryness, focusing on the steady rhythm of the syllables, the rise and fall of your breath. Around you, the other priests sway slightly, not in time to the music exactly, but in the slow, unconscious rhythm of people lost in repetition. When the final verse comes, the high priest raises the sistrum again and shakes it 3 times. The sound cuts the hymn short, and the sudden silence is almost startling. For a moment, all you hear is the soft hiss of the incense and the faint ringing in your own ears. Then, as one, the priests bow low toward the altar, holding the bow for 3 long breaths before straightening. The hymn is over, but its echo lingers, humming in your bones as you file out of the sanctuary. Outside, the sun is fully up, and the day's work begins, though for now you will be sent to greet the first petitioners who arrive at the temple gates, bringing their questions, their offerings, and their long list of troubles for Thoth to solve. By the time you reach the temple gates, the sun is already warming the pale stone walls, and the courtyard outside hums with the soft sounds of the city waking. Merchants are setting up stalls along the main street. A baker's boy hurries past with a basket of flatbread, and somewhere nearby a donkey brays in protest at its morning load. The gates of the Temple of the Moon stand open, the bronze hinges catching the light, and before them gathers the small but steady line of petitioners. They come with offerings in hand, baskets of figs, small clay jars of honey, strings of garlic, even the occasional folded scrap of linen, each accompanied by a request. Some are dressed in fine linen and carry themselves with the confidence of those used to being heard. Others wear patched tunics and bare feet, their eyes darting nervously as they approach. All are here for the same thing, to have their words carried to Thoth, the god who, in their minds, can untangle any knot, answer any question, fix any misstep. Your job is not to grant their requests, that is for the high priest and the council, but to listen, record, and decide which petitions are worth carrying deeper into the temple. It is, in its own way, a test of patience. The first petitioner is a merchant who insists the gods must intervene because his neighbour has been encroaching on his stall space at the market. He speaks as if the very stability of the kingdom depends on this matter, waving his hands dramatically while his basket of figs slowly slips sideways. You make a note in the wax tablet you carry and murmur that the matter will be brought before the god's servants. The next is a young woman clutching a small jar of oil, her voice barely above a whisper. She wishes for a blessing for her unborn child, fearing an ill omen from a dream she had 3 nights ago. Her words are halting, but her eyes are wide and sincere, and you write her request with care, noting the offering beside it. Some petitions carry more weight simply because they carry more heart. And so it goes. A scribe who has lost a document and begs Thoth to guide his hand in finding it. An elderly farmer who wants rain for his barley fields. A fisherman who suspects another is casting nets too close to his waters. Some are practical, some superstitious, some bordering on the absurd, like the man who requests the god's help in teaching his parrot to speak more clearly. Each request is taken seriously in your outward manner, even if your inward thoughts sometimes wander. The truth is, part of your work is not just listening, but shaping, deciding which words will reach the inner sanctum and which will stop here, wrapped in the polite promise of consideration. When the morning line dwindles, you close the wax tablet and tuck it under your arm. The offerings are carried inside, to be sorted, stored, or prepared for the altar. And you? You're already due in the library chambers, where the high priest will review the petitions, and, inevitably, turn several into long philosophical debates no one asked for. The library chamber smells of dry papyrus and lamp oil, a scent you've come to associate with hours of stillness and the faint ache that comes from sitting cross-legged too long. Tall shelves line the walls, stacked with scrolls whose titles are carefully inked in the neat, angular hand of the temple scribes. In the centre stands a broad cedar table, polished smooth by years of elbows, palms, and the weight of ancient texts. This is where the petitions will be reviewed, a process that sounds simple enough until you've lived through it. The high priest arrives first, settling into his carved chair with a slow dignity that suggests he has already decided none of these requests will be straightforward. Two senior priests take seats on either side of him, reed pens in hand, ready to copy the worthy petitions into permanent records. You unroll your wax tablet and begin to read aloud. The first petition, the merchant's complaint about market stall encroachment, earns a brief frown from the high priest, followed by a long musing on the nature of boundaries in the human heart, and how disputes over physical space often mirror spiritual unrest. What might have been solved with a line in the dirt turns into a 15-minute discourse on the symbolic ownership of one's destiny. You nod at intervals, wondering how the merchant will react when he hears his problem has been translated into metaphor. The second petition, the young woman's plea for her unborn child, draws more solemn attention. The high priest murmurs that dreams are messages written in the ink of the soul, and instructs that her offering be placed on the altar at the next full moon. One of the senior priests makes a note in the record scroll, adding a small sketch of an oil jar beside the entry. As the review continues, the tone swings wildly between the practical and the abstract. The lost document of the scribe prompts a debate over whether divine intervention extends to carelessness. The farmer's request for rain leads to a layered discussion on whether it is more righteous to ask for relief or to endure hardship with faith. The fisherman's complaint about nets is momentarily promising, until the high priest drifts into a lecture on the symbolism of fish as knowledge swimming in the waters of the mind. You keep your expression neutral, though you can't help but notice how easily these sessions drift away from the petitions themselves. It's as if the actual requests are only sparks to light the real fire. The priest's endless appetite for turning everyday problems into cosmic lessons. Even the absurd request about the parrot is not immune. The high priest seizes it as an opportunity to speak on the importance of clear speech in the service of truth, which, admittedly, is a more elegant response than "we don't train birds." By the time the last petition is read, the morning sun has shifted high enough to flood the library chamber with light. The high priest declares the review complete, the decisions final, and the scroll rolled tight for storage in the temple archives. You gather your wax tablet, careful to erase the notes before they can become clutter for tomorrow's work. Next on your list is less philosophical but no less delicate, escorting the day's chosen offerings to the altar, where they will be arranged for the midday rite. And unlike the petitions, there will be no debate about which way the bread should face. The midday sun filters into the offering hall through high, narrow slits in the stone, creating thin blades of light that cut across the floor. The air here is warmer than the rest of the temple, the scent of fresh bread and ripe fruit hanging heavy. The chosen offerings for the day are already laid out on a low cedar table, loaves of barley bread baked at dawn, figs so dark they're almost purple, jars of honey sealed with wax, and a cluster of pomegranates split just enough to show the red seeds within. Your task is to arrange them for the midday rite, a process that, at first glance, might look like a matter of setting things down. But here, arrangement is an act of devotion. Each loaf must face the altar at a slight angle so the scored tops appear as open hands to the gods. The figs are placed in groups of 3, each group forming a triangle pointing toward the sanctuary doors. The honey jars are aligned so that their wax seals catch the light from the nearest lamp, symbolizing the illumination of wisdom. Even the pomegranates are set with their opened sides turned just so, as if to offer their jeweled seeds directly to Thoth. You work slowly, aware of the eyes on you. A junior priest lingers nearby, ready to hand you the next item or adjust the cloth covering the table. Occasionally, one of the senior attendants will step forward to tweak the angle of a loaf or move a fig half an inch. their faces grave as if they are correcting a sacred text. It's not meant to unsettle you, though it does. The implication being that the gods notice what mortals might not. Once the arrangement is complete, the offerings are covered with a sheer linen cloth to keep off dust and insects until the rite begins. You step back, surveying the table from every angle, making sure no shadow falls awkwardly across the bread. No jar sits too far from its counterpart. In the stillness, you hear the faint crackle of the lamps and the murmur of a chant from somewhere deeper in the temple, a reminder that time is moving toward the noon hour. When the high priest arrives, he inspects the table in silence, his eyes moving over every detail. After a long moment, he gives the smallest of nods. It is the closest thing to praise you'll receive today. He lifts one corner of the linen cloth, just enough to breathe in the scent of the bread, then lets it fall back into place. With that, the rite can proceed. As the noon gong sounds, you and the other attendants carry the table forward, your steps measured, your hands steady. The offerings seem to grow heavier the closer you get to the altar, though you know it's only the weight of the moment pressing down. Once set in place, the table becomes part of the ceremony, silent, still, a wordless prayer in the language of fruit, grain, and sweetness. When the rite ends, the offerings will be carried away, portions burned for the gods, the rest set aside for the temple's own. But for now, they sit under the vaulted ceiling in the soft glow of the midday sun, as perfect as human hands can make them. The noon gong has barely stopped resonating when the high priest steps to the altar, his white linen robe edged in gold thread that catches the sun streaming from the clear story windows. The incense burners are already glowing, their smoke curling upward in lazy spirals, and the air is thick with a sweetness that coats the back of your throat. You take your place along the right-hand side of the sanctuary, part of the line of attendants who stand motionless while the rite unfolds. The midday rite is one of the shorter ceremonies of the day, but its stillness demands more of you than any amount of labour. There is no pacing, no carrying, no whispered exchanges, only standing in perfect posture, eyes forward, while the high priest offers prayers and gestures that have been performed for centuries without change. The repetition is deliberate. Every movement mirrors those done at the same hour by generations past, each a link in an unbroken chain of devotion. The first part is the invocation. The high priest raises his arms toward the altar, palms up, and speaks the opening words, a cascade of syllables in the old temple tongue, their rhythm both foreign and familiar. His voice carries easily, shaped by years of training to fill the vaulted space without strain. The words roll over you like a tide, and though you've heard them countless times, you still catch fragments that seem new depending on the day's light or your own wandering thoughts. Next comes the presentation of the offerings. Two attendants step forward, lift the linen cloth from the table, and fold it away in one smooth motion. The high priest circles the altar once, stopping at each cardinal point to gesture toward the bread, figs, honey, and pomegranates. At each stop he speaks a blessing, brief but precise, invoking Thoth's wisdom to be as nourishing as the bread, as sweet as the honey, as plentiful as the seeds of the pomegranate. Then comes the libation. A bronze ewer of water, cool from the temple's well, is poured slowly into a shallow basin before the altar. The sound is soft but steady, like distant rain. The water will be used later to anoint the altar's silver inlays, each drop meant to refresh the bond between the god and his servants. Through it all, you remain perfectly still, the weight of your own body gradually making itself known in the pull at your calves, the warmth creeping into your feet. The trick is to shift your balance so subtly that no one notices, a skill you learned early after your first time nearly toppling during a particularly long invocation. The rite ends with the sealing prayer. The high priest raises the sistrum and shakes it 3 times, the sharp chime slicing through the incense haze. Everyone bows low, holding the position for 3 breaths before straightening. The offerings will remain for a time, but your role in this moment is done. As the assembly disperses, you step back into the cooler outer hall, your knees grateful for the change. Yet you know the day is far from over. Soon you'll be sent to the storerooms where the afternoon's tasks, quieter but no less exacting, await. The storerooms are tucked deep within the temple, far from the light of the sanctuary. To reach them, you follow a narrow corridor that slopes downward, the air cooling with each step. The stone underfoot is smooth from centuries of sandals passing this way, and the smell changes gradually. Fading incense replaced by the earthy tang of grain sacks, the faint sweetness of dried dates, and the resin scent of cedar chests. At the storeroom entrance, a thick wooden door swings open on bronze hinges, revealing rows upon rows of shelves, chests, and sealed jars. The space is dimly lit by a handful of lamps, their light barely reaching the far corners. The temple's stores are organized according to a system that would make perfect sense to someone who's been here for decades, and absolutely none to an untrained eye. It's your task to find, record, and prepare the items requested for the afternoon duties without disturbing the balance of the room. You start with the grain section. Tall clay bins, each sealed with a clay stopper stamped with the temple seal, hold the barley and emmer wheat used for baking the offering bread. Using a flat bronze scoop, you measure out the day's portion into a sack, careful not to spill a grain onto the floor. Every handful here is accounted for. A loss, even of a few seeds, would need to be explained in the temple's ledgers. Next, you head to the fruit shelves. Clusters of dried figs hang from cords, their skins wrinkled and deep brown, while baskets of pomegranates sit cushioned in straw. You select a few for tomorrow's offerings, checking each one for blemishes. The gods are not to be presented with anything less than perfect. Beside them are sealed jars of honey, their wax tops smooth and golden. Lifting one is enough to remind you just how much wealth is stored in this room. A single jar could pay a farmer's taxes for a season. The far wall holds the precious imports, frankincense wrapped in linen packets, rolls of cinnamon bark, rare oils kept in small alabaster bottles. You check the inventory against the wax tablet in your hand, making sure every piece is where it should be. The chief storekeeper is strict, not out of suspicion, but because a missing packet of spice here can cause trouble for a ritual weeks later. Every so often you pause to listen. The storerooms are quiet, but not silent. You hear the soft settling of grain, the faint creak of wooden shelves, even the almost imperceptible rustle of a mouse somewhere far off. The sacred cat patrols down here too, though she's more often found curled in a corner, half asleep, pretending not to notice you. Once your list is complete, you carry the selected items to the preparation table near the entrance. A junior attendant takes them from you, marking them off the day's records before sending them upstairs. You linger for a moment, letting your eyes adjust before heading back into the sunlit corridors above. By the time you emerge, the warmth of the day is in full force, and the sanctuary bells are calling for the next set of duties, the reading of the midday scrolls. The library hall is cooler than the outer courts, its thick stone walls sheltering you from the noon heat. Dust motes drift lazily in the shafts of light that slip through narrow windows high above, turning the air into something almost tangible. The scent here is familiar: aged papyrus, lamp oil, and the faint sharpness of ink. Along the far wall, a row of tall wooden cupboards holds the temple's scrolls, each one wrapped in linen and marked with a small clay tag bearing its title. The midday reading is both a ritual and a duty. At this hour, priests gather to hear a selected passage from the temple archives, a mixture of sacred hymns, instructions for rituals, and sometimes obscure philosophical treatises that can tie your thoughts in knots if you let them. The high priest chooses the scroll, but it is often an attendant like you who does the actual reading. Today's selection is a scroll on lunar cycles and their symbolic meanings. You take it carefully from its shelf, unwrapping the linen and feeling the smooth, slightly brittle texture of the papyrus beneath your fingertips. The inked characters are dark and steady, each stroke made with deliberate care by a scribe long dead. You carry it to the reading desk in the centre of the hall, where a low bronze lamp casts a circle of warm light across the surface. The other priests settle into their places on reed mats around you, their robes pooling like soft clouds. The high priest nods for you to begin. You clear your throat, lower your eyes to the scroll, and start reading in the measured cadence required for public recitation. The first lines describe the phases of the moon as steps in a staircase from shadow to light, a phrase you've always liked. The text moves on to list which prayers and offerings align with each phase, details you know by heart but must read exactly as written. The challenge is not the words themselves, but the length. The scroll is divided into long columns, each dense with text, and your eyes must move steadily without skipping or repeating a line. The rhythm of the reading is its own kind of trance, pulling you into the flow of the words until the outside world fades away. Every so often you glance up to gauge the room. Some of the priests are attentive, their eyes fixed on you as if weighing each syllable. Others drift somewhere between listening and daydreaming, their gazes unfocused. You can tell who has heard this passage too many times by the subtle way they shift their weight or tap their fingers against their knees. When you reach the final section, a meditation on the silver mirror of the heavens, you slow your pace slightly, letting the last lines settle in the air. The high priest gives a single nod, and you roll the scroll carefully, rewrapping it in its linen before returning it to its shelf. The reading is over, but its words linger in the quiet that follows. Soon, you'll be sent to assist with copying a damaged scroll in the scriptorium, a task requiring even more patience than reading aloud. The scriptorium is a long, narrow chamber lined with low writing tables, each angled slightly so that the papyrus sheets don't catch too much glare from the sunlight filtering through the lattice windows. The air smells faintly of gum Arabic and soot ink, with an undertone of dry reeds from the pens stacked neatly in baskets along the wall. Here, time doesn't so much pass as dissolve into the slow rhythm of scratching pen against papyrus. Today's task is the restoration of a damaged scroll, one that holds an old hymn to Thoth rarely used except during rare lunar eclipses. The original is laid out before you, its edges frayed, several lines near the middle smudged by what looks like a long-ago water stain. Your job is not to improvise or improve, it is to copy exactly what remains, preserving every curve, every spacing exactly as the scribe first intended. You start by cutting a fresh sheet of papyrus to the proper size, running your fingers along the edges to check for frays. Next, you dip the reed pen into the ink, tapping it lightly on the rim of the small bronze pot to keep from blotting the first stroke. The first few lines are easy, the characters still sharp and unbroken. You trace them with your eyes, then recreate them on the fresh sheet with slow, steady pressure, the ink sinking in with a dark, even tone. When you reach the damaged section, the work changes. You lean closer, tilting your head so the light catches the faint impressions where the ink once lay. Sometimes a character is complete enough to guess. Other times, you must check the temple's reference copies stored on the opposite shelf. This means standing, unrolling another scroll, comparing lines, and returning to your place without losing the flow. Every movement feels deliberate, as if the air itself has thickened to remind you of the scroll's fragility. Around you, the other scribes work in silence. The only sounds are the faint scrape of pen tips, the occasional soft cough, and the quiet drip of a water jar in the corner. One of the older scribes, seated to your left, is repairing a tear in another scroll, aligning the fibres with the precision of a jeweller setting a gem. Another is sharpening his pen with a small knife, the reed shavings curling away in thin spirals. Hours slip by unnoticed. Your hand begins to ache, the muscles in your fingers tightening from holding the pen too long without pause. You flex them briefly, then continue, knowing that stopping too often risks breaking the steady rhythm needed for clean lines. When the last character is finally drawn, you set the pen aside and let the ink dry before rolling the sheet carefully. It will be stitched to the rest of the restored scroll later, after the chief scribe inspects your work for errors, and he will find them if they exist. You stand, stretching your shoulders, feeling the stiffness set in from so much stillness. Outside, the light has shifted. The afternoon shadows are lengthening. Soon, it will be time to prepare the lamps for the evening rites. The temple changes in tone as the sun lowers. The golden brightness of midday softens into a cooler light, the corridors beginning to hold shadows in their corners. Evening rites require more than ceremony. They require light, and that duty falls first to the lamp attendants. Today, that's you. The lamp room sits just off the main sanctuary, its shelves lined with clay and bronze lamps in every size. Some are small enough to be carried by hand, others large enough to hold enough oil for an entire night's burning. Each is cleaned daily, the soot from the previous night's flame carefully scraped away so that the wick will burn pure and steady. You begin with the oil jars, heavy clay vessels stored in the cool of the inner chamber. The oil, pressed from olives grown in the temple's groves, has a faint green-gold hue and smells faintly sharp and grassy. Using a small bronze pitcher, you pour it into each lamp until the level is just right, full enough to burn through the evening rites, but not so full that the oil will spill when carried. Next, you trim the wicks. Each is made from tightly twisted linen fibres, soaked in oil to catch the flame quickly. The trick is to cut them clean and even, so the flame burns straight and doesn't gutter in drafts. You set each lamp in a row on the low table, the wicks pointed slightly toward the front so they will light more easily. Once filled and trimmed, the lamps are carried into the sanctuary and placed in their appointed spots, along the base of the altar, on narrow ledges between columns and at the foot of the great silver moon disk that hangs behind the altar's rear wall. The placement is exact, down to the space between each lamp, so that the light falls evenly without casting distracting shadows. When all are in place, the high priest steps forward for the lighting. You follow with the bronze taper, a long-handled tool with a wick at its tip, already burning from a small starter lamp. One by one, you touch the flame to each wick, watching as the light catches and grows, the oil's surface trembling in the heat. The sanctuary fills with a warm glow, the shadows pushed back into the farthest recesses. The silver moon disk reflects the light in a soft shimmer, and for a moment, the air feels almost suspended, as though the world outside the temple has paused. Lighting the lamps is more than illumination, it is a signal. It marks the shift from the day's labour to the night's watchfulness, from sunlight to the steady gaze of the moon. As the last flame steadies, the evening incense is already being prepared, and the murmur of chants begins to echo in the side corridors. Your work here is done, but you'll stay close. Oil burns steadily, but never without risk, and it is your task to watch for the telltale sputter of a wick running low. The gods must never look down and see their sanctuary dim before its time. The incense room is small but heavy with scent, the air dense with layers of spice and resin that have seeped into the very stone over generations. Clay jars line the shelves, each marked with a simple painted symbol, a crescent moon for frankincense, a wave for myrrh, a stylized seed pod for cinnamon. Some jars hold whole resins, others powders, and a few contain rare aromatics so precious they are used only during eclipses or royal visits. Evening incense must be mixed fresh. The temple's belief is that stale incense, no matter how fine, loses its soul. You start by unsealing the jar of frankincense, the pale golden tears clinking softly as you pour them into a shallow bronze mortar. Next comes myrrh, darker and more bitter in scent, the resin slightly tacky under your fingertips. Finally, a small measure of cinnamon bark, shaved into fine curls with a bronze knife. The pestle is smooth from years of use, fitting perfectly into your hand. You crush the resins slowly, grinding them into smaller pieces until they begin to merge, their fragrances blending into a warm, almost tangible weight in the air. The cinnamon's sharpness lifts the deeper notes of the myrrh, while the frankincense glows through it all like sunlight through smoke. By the time the mixture is ready, the air in the room feels charged, as if the scent itself holds a kind of low hum. When the mixture is complete, you carry it to the sanctuary in a covered bronze bowl. The high priest waits by the altar, a small charcoal brazier already glowing red at its centre. Without a word, you kneel and lift the lid. The fragrance escapes in a sudden wave, curling upward like an eager spirit. With a small bronze spoon, you sprinkle the incense onto the coals. The first touch sends a ribbon of white smoke curling upward, followed by a thicker plume as more resin catches. The smoke doesn't rise in a straight line. It twists, folds, and dances, shaping itself into spirals that seem to chase one another into the dimness above. In the temple's teachings, this is the visible form of prayer, the offering of scent travelling upward to the gods, carrying with it the unspoken hopes of the day. The sanctuary fills with the aroma, rich and layered. It softens the hard lines of the stone, wraps itself around the flicker of the lamps, and settles into the folds of the priest's linen robes. The chants begin, low and steady, weaving with the smoke until sound and scent seem to move as one. Your part is nearly done, but you stay a moment longer, watching the last spoonfuls of incense melt into the coals. There is something grounding in this act, the simple rhythm of preparation, the knowledge that, for all the ceremony's grandeur, it still depends on the careful grinding of resin and bark in a quiet room. When you step back into the cooler outer hall, the scent clings to you. For the rest of the night, wherever you walk, the smell of frankincense and myrrh will trail behind, a reminder of the moment when the day began to slip into the moon's keeping. The sanctuary grows quieter after the incense ceremony, though the scent still hangs in the air, warm and sweet, clinging to every fold of linen and every carved groove in the stone. Outside, the last light of the sun fades to a deep copper along the western sky. Somewhere beyond the city walls, the moon is rising, but it must clear the horizon before the vigil begins. You take your place in the outer courtyard, where the first part of the moonrise watch is held. The stone underfoot has cooled, holding only a faint memory of the day's heat. A few other priests stand nearby, speaking in low tones or adjusting their robes against the slight evening breeze. Beyond the walls, you can hear the city settling, the clink of a market stall closing, the distant call of a herdsman to his animals, the faint echo of a child's laughter before it's pulled inside for the night. The high priest stands at the eastern gate, hands folded in front of him, gaze fixed on the darkening horizon. The rest of you follow his lead, falling silent as the sky deepens into indigo. The first stars appear, bright pinpricks that shimmer and then hold steady. And then, there it is, the faintest silver curve, so low it could almost be mistaken for a cloud's edge catching the last of the sun. Slowly, it grows, the pale light sharpening as the moon rises higher. The temple's great silver disk behind the altar will soon reflect it, but for now, the moon's glow feels far away, a promise still making its way toward you. When it clears the horizon, the high priest lifts his hand in a silent signal. The small bell beside the gate is rung 3 times, its clear tone carrying across the courtyard. You bow your head briefly, not to the moon itself, but to the god whose domain it marks. Inside, the lamps burn steadily, waiting. Soon you'll follow the high priest back into the sanctuary, where the moon's light will be welcomed as though it were stepping through the doors itself. For now, you watch a little longer, letting your eyes adjust to its glow. The moment the moon clears the horizon, the high priest leads the way back into the temple. The shift from the cool night air to the warm glow of the sanctuary feels almost like stepping into another world. The lamps burn in their precise rows, their light now mingling with the silver glow spilling through the high eastern windows. It's a softer illumination than sunlight, cooler, more deliberate, as if it chooses where to settle. At the altar, the silver moon disk gleams. By day, it reflects firelight. By night, it seems to drink in the moon's rays until it glows from within. The high priest raises both hands toward it, speaking the words of welcome, a short invocation that acknowledges the moon not as an object in the sky, but as a sign of the god's steady watch over the world. His voice carries in the hush, the syllables measured, shaped to fall in time with the breath. You and the other attendants take your places along the aisle, each holding a small bronze mirror. At the signal, you angle the mirrors to catch the moonlight coming through the window, bouncing it toward the altar so the silver disc blazes brighter. The effect is subtle at first, then suddenly overwhelming, a shimmer of white gold light washing across the offering table, making the bread, fruit, and honey gleam as though they have just been placed. For a few breaths, there is no sound but the faint hiss of oil lamps and the quiet creak of the great doors as they are drawn closed to keep the night air from dimming the flames. Then the high priest lowers his arms, and the mirrors are set aside. The moon is welcomed, the god is honoured. From here, the night's rituals will unfold, prayers, readings, and silent hours of watchfulness. But the first part is done, the transition from day to night, sealed in a glow of silver and gold. You glance once more at the moon disk, its surface now bright enough to seem alive. Whatever else the night may hold, you know this light will remain until the dawn touches the temple walls again. The sanctuary grows still after the moonlight ceremony. The lamps burn steadily, their flames small but unwavering, casting slow-moving shadows across the columns. The scent of incense still lingers, though softer now, like the memory of a voice once loud. You take your place along the north wall, part of the watch rotation that will last until dawn. The long night watch is not meant for action, but for presence. A silent guard over the offerings, the altar, and the sacred objects in the inner chamber. The temple's teachings say the gods need no protection, but their house must always be kept in perfect order, even while the city sleeps. The hours pass in quiet rhythms. One priest paces slowly between the doors and the altar, his steps a soft counterpoint to the faint hiss of the lamps. Another sits cross-legged near the entrance to the inner chamber, head bowed, lips moving in silent recitation. You keep your gaze steady on the altar, though your thoughts drift toward the outside, imagining the moonlight spilling across the city rooftops, the hush of the streets, the cool air settling in the courtyards. Every so often, a small duty breaks the stillness, adding a spoonful of oil to a lamp running low, adjusting a curtain that's shifted in a draft, or checking the doors for a secure latch. These small movements feel amplified in the quiet, every sound, the creak of a hinge, the faint clink of bronze, briefly filling the space before fading. The high priest passes through twice during the watch, silent except for a single nod. His presence feels heavier than the darkness itself, as if the weight of all the temple's traditions moves with him. You measure time not by clocks, but by the moon's slow journey across the high windows. When it reaches its zenith, the light falls directly across the altar, making the silver disk blaze again as though it were a second dawn. By the time it begins its descent, your shift will be nearly done. Until then, you remain as you are, steady, silent, keeping the watch that has been held every night for longer than memory. The darkest hour comes just before the eastern sky begins to pale. You can feel it in the stillness, the kind that seems to hold its breath before the world moves again. The lamps burn low now, their oil nearly spent, the flames steady but smaller. Soon they will be extinguished, their work for the night complete. You move quietly through the sanctuary, checking each one. Those nearest the altar are left burning a little longer, their light keeping the offerings visible until the first touch of the sun replaces it. The rest are snuffed with a bronze cap, the faint curl of smoke rising and fading into the cold air. In the outer court, another priest is already sweeping the flagstones, gathering the night's fallen leaves and bits of wind-blown dust. The sweep of the reed broom is soft but constant, marking the slow transformation from night's stillness to morning's readiness. The scent of the evening incense has thinned, replaced by the faint crisp smell of air that has yet to be touched by heat. Inside, you check the altar. The bread is still fresh enough for the morning rite. The fruit remains untouched. A portion of each will be removed shortly, some to be burned in offering, some given to the temple's kitchen. Every movement here is purposeful, and nothing is done in haste, even with dawn pressing close. From the eastern windows, the first faint gold begins to spread, catching on the silver moon disk and turning its glow softer, warmer. It's the moment when the temple's balance shifts again, the moon's watch giving way to the sun's dominion. You stand still for a breath, letting the change settle, before returning to your tasks. In the storage alcove, you prepare fresh lamps for the day, emptying and cleaning those used in the night. The oil jars are closed and set aside until evening. A small brazier is lit in the kitchen court, the first wisp of smoke curling upward. Not incense, but the smell of grain porridge beginning to warm for the priest's morning meal. By the time the sun's rim touches the horizon, the sanctuary is ready. The night's shadows have been swept away, The lamps stand clean and unlit, and the altar waits for the day's first invocation. The high priest will arrive soon, and with him, the start of another cycle. The moment the first edge of the sun clears the horizon, the high priest enters the sanctuary. His robe is different from the night's, a brighter white, edged in gold thread that catches the fresh morning light. Behind him, the attendants file in, each carrying a small sprig of green reeds cut from the riverbank at dawn. The air feels sharper now, as though the temple itself has drawn in a breath. The silver moon disk still hangs behind the altar, but its light is fading in the sun's new brilliance. The high priest steps forward, raising both arms toward the eastern windows where the sunlight now pours in. His voice rings out in the morning invocation, the first prayer of the day, a greeting to the sun not as a star, but as the visible face of divine order. You and the other attendants step forward in turn, placing your reed sprigs at the base of the altar. The green is fresh, still damp with river water, a reminder of renewal and the cycles that carry life from one day to the next. The offering bread is uncovered, its surface catching the light, and the fruit glows with a richer colour in the warmth of morning. The invocation flows through its verses, shifting from praise to petition. The words call for clarity of thought, steady hands in service, and the strength to carry out the day's work without faltering. Each line feels measured, the cadence rising and falling like the slow pull of the river's current. When the final verse is spoken, the high priest takes a small bronze dish of fresh water and pours it in a thin stream over the altar's edge. The water splashes softly into a stone basin below, its sound marking the close of the rite. The attendants bow together, holding the moment of stillness before straightening. Outside, the city is fully awake, market stalls opening, voices rising in the streets, the smell of bread baking drifting faintly over the walls. Inside, the temple stands ready, its first duty of the day complete. The rest will unfold in its own time, but for now the sun has been welcomed and the cycle begins anew. When the dawn invocation ends, the temple does not fall into idleness. The work simply shifts into the countless small tasks that carry it through the day. Tending the gardens, receiving offerings from the city's people, preparing scrolls for the next readings, repairing robes, polishing bronze. Yet, for a brief time between morning rites and midday preparations, there is a quiet that belongs entirely to those within the walls. You walk the courtyard in that calm, your steps echoing softly on the clean flagstones. The air is warm, but not yet heavy, scented faintly with the green of the reeds and the last traces of incense. The great silver moon disk still hangs in the sanctuary, now a pale presence in the light of the sun. Its brilliance, resting until night, calls it forth again. It feels almost human, this change, as if even sacred things need their moments of rest. In the kitchens, steam rises from cooking pots, and the voices of the temple cooks mingle with the clatter of clay bowls. Their work is as essential as any ritual. A hungry priest cannot hold steady in his duties. You pass through to the outer gardens, where the fig trees lean gently toward the sunlight, their leaves flickering in the breeze. Here, some of the younger attendants take their lessons in reading or in the careful tying of ritual knots. Even in this stillness, learning continues. Your own hands are not idle. You clean the small bronze mirror used during the moon's welcome, polishing until it catches the sunlight in a sharp, perfect beam. You replace its linen wrapping before returning it to the storeroom, its place marked and memorized. Every tool, every vessel, every scrap of linen has its exact home. Order here is not merely habit, it is devotion. The hours move gently. By the time the sun has climbed high enough to shorten the shadows, the temple begins its turn toward midday rites. The bells will sound again, the storerooms will be opened, the scrolls unrolled, and so it will continue, as it has for longer than anyone here has been alive. You think for a moment about the unbroken chain of days like this. Priests before you waking in the same chambers, walking the same paths, standing in the same light. The tasks have changed little. The bread is baked, the lamps are trimmed, the offerings are placed, the watch is kept. It is a rhythm older than memory, one that will continue long after you are gone. And perhaps that is the point. The temple's service is not measured in individual moments of brilliance, but in the steady holding of its place in the world. A place where moonlight and sunlight meet without conflict, where the hours are shaped by the balance between quiet labour and sacred ceremony. By the time the evening comes again, you will be back at the lamps, trimming and filling, watching for the first pale curve of the moon. The same motions, the same scents, the same weight of the oil jars in your hands. And yet, each night feels new, because each night is its own link in the endless chain. The high priest often says that the temple's purpose is not to stand against time, but to move with it, to meet each day and each night as they arrive, without rushing them and without holding them back. Here, under the watch of Thoth's moon and the light of the sun, you begin to understand what he means. And so, as the morning's quiet gives way to the day's hum, you take your place again. The circle turns, the hours pass, and you are exactly where you are meant to be. If you followed this journey through the temple's day, take a moment to keep its rhythm alive. Let the story stay with you and return again when the moon rises.